The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning. My name is Hannah Tarrats. I'm the training manager at Datatech. We'd like to thank you for connecting into our payroll compliance checkup webinar this morning. Um, we decided to put this webinar together because there's been a lot of hot topics in the ag industry, especially in California. And so we wanted to address some issues that you may want to look at before the upcoming season to see if you need to make any changes in your policies, procedures, or payroll processing. So as we still have some people connecting in, I just wanted to talk about a little bit about what we're hearing in the ag industry. And one of the things that we do at Datatech is we sponsor two different organizations. One is the California Farm Labor Contractors Association, and one is APMA, the Agricultural Professional Management Association. And they hold ag labor forums every year that we attend. And this is where we really get information from attorneys into industry and what's the latest wage and hour changes, what's coming up with lawsuits. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of this information with you. And this is really what kind of helped us prepare this presentation for you today. The big thing in California is PAGA. So if you're out of California or if you aren't up to speed with what's going on, PAGA is the Private Attorney General's Act. Started in 2024, basically because California doesn't have the resources to handle all these wage and hour lawsuits. They made a provision that employees can go to private attorneys. And then the private attorneys can create a class action lawsuit. There's a bunch of different filings. I'm not an attorney. I'm not going through all the details of that. I'm paraphrasing from information that we've gathered. But it's really become a big issue because you have these types of lawyers, what we call like ambulance chaser type lawyers, that are now targeting the ag industry, that are getting call lists of field workers calling up saying, hey, are you getting paid for all your time? Are your check stubs have this information? And creating all of these lawsuits. And we're seeing that here. We get an influx of requests and subpoenas for records. So we know this is an issue a lot of our customers are facing. So the issue now is really how to be proactive. So a few of the big things that are being talked about is one is arbitration agreements. And I'll be honest, before the last couple of years of attending these ag labor forums, I hadn't really heard of the ag industry implementing arbitration agreements. The arbitration agreements allow you basically, if an employee raises an issue, to address it just with that employee and not become a class action lawsuit. And that's certainly something you have to talk to your legal counsel about, but I want to bring it up because I know a lot of our customers haven't attended these ag labor forums and maybe haven't heard about some of these ways of protecting yourself and your company. The other big thing that they've made changes in PAGA is allowing almost like good faith defense. Like you're trying to do everything right, you can lower your penalties and fees. And so some of the things of doing that is having wage and hour law audits, and having that conducted by legal counsel is the best way to go. But you can also do some self audits, and we'll talk about that a little bit during our session today. And really trying to have standard operating procedures, having processes implemented to check and double check that your payroll is accurate, employees are compensated correctly. And when there are issues, employees miss meals, or there's issues, sexual harassment, other things that happen on the workplace, really documenting that, showing that you took steps to correct issues and are, trying to be a good employer. So those are some of the things maybe outside the payroll that I just want to mention at the outset. And again, those ag labor forms, I highly recommend you look into those. And again, before we get started, I'm not a lawyer. I've been involved in data tech for 30 years. If you don't know, I've grown up in the business. It's started by my father. So I'm really hands-on on the software aspect of it. But I'll really try and help you out and apply some of these things we've heard on payroll compliance to help you ensure your payroll is accurate, along with the tools that the software has available. All right, so the 5 things that we're going to talk today about are uncollected and unpaid time, miscategorizing employees, accurately paying overtime, making wage corrections, and accurately accruing and paying sick time. So, some of these things we're not going super in depth. I'm going to assume you have some basic knowledge, like on overtime premium and sick pay laws. I'm going to be just highlighting issues that we see. But if you need some more in depth, you can always contact us, our support department, for additional information or to schedule additional training. I did want to mention before we get in, we are recording the session. We put this into the chat as well. We'll have the video available. We'll post it on our blog. As time allows, we will be taking questions, but those should go into the questions area. If you see in your GoToWebinar, there's a chat and a questions and a hand. We want you to put those into the questions area. If we don't have time today, then what we'll do is on our blog post, when we post the recording, we'll answer the questions that we didn't get to. And I am not going to be looking for hands. We just have too many people in this session. It's too hard to unmute and mute, phones. So don't do the hands. Just put it in to your questions. All right. So let's get started talking about uncollected and unpaid time. And this is really, again, something that's kind of outside the scope of the payroll system, but it's your biggest issue that's going to come up with lawsuits. So, like I said, lawyers are calling field workers saying, hey, are you not getting paid for all your time? Are you requested to be there at 6:45, but the supervisor's starting the time at 7? Are you getting clocked out at 3:30, but you're having to check in tools or clean your equipment? All of those things, those little minutes of time can come back to haunt you if you're not accurately paying for that. And so there's two aspects of that is one, how are you recording the time? One of the things one of the lawyers brought up during one of the labor sessions is every timesheet says, 7 to 3:30. Lunches are always the same time. Breaks are always the same time. Every timesheet is the same. That's a red flag because every day, 100% of it is not going to be exactly the same. So I would review your processes. How are your supervisors instructed to start the time on the timesheet? Some of our customers are going down and now recording the minute. If they start at 6:55, you write 6:55. You don't write 7 o'clock. So that's one thing that you should really be reviewing. The other thing, a lot of our customers use data collections, and those tools are great, but it's the same thing as your payroll software. If you're not using it correctly, then you're not going to have good results. So, some of the data collection systems, you have employees come in, they're scanning badges. And so now the employee's been waiting in line as 20, 30 people are getting their badge scanned. Well, that employee at the end of the line is already on your time. So they have some tools where they're all scanned in at the same time as the first employee. So you don't have this lapse of a couple minutes that he's not getting paid for. So if you do use data collections, I'd really I recommend you talk to your system and make sure, whatever tools you can implement, you're doing. And then just really knowing what's going on in the field. That's part of that self audit, going out and talking to employees. Are they checking out and then having to go somewhere else to turn in tools? Or are you having crew bosses that are working on timesheets in the evening and they're not being compensated for that time? So really dive deep into some of those issues and then figure out, okay, well, here's the issues. How do we fix them this season? So a big thing that was talked about is missed meals. Again, nothing's ever perfect. If you have a lawsuit and employees are claiming they missed their meals and you've never paid a missed meal period, that's a red flag. So do supervisors have a way on the timesheets to mark if the employee missed a meal? Or say an employee has an issue, he's talking to the supervisor after all the other employees left. Is that supervisor noting that one employee was there for an extra 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and that employee gets overtime? Another big thing that we still see, and I was surprised because I talked to our support department on what are some of the issues that you're still seeing with customers. And we're still seeing a lot of people just paying piecework that aren't doing non productive time. So if you think about it, again, this is California. I know Washington has break time as well. There's some nuances, some differences between the two. But in California, if you are paying strictly piece rate, then any other time they're not able to be picking, producing, earning that piece rate is non-productive and needs to be paid at least minimum wage. So if you think again, they're lining up, they're clocking in, they're getting directions going to what field, what row. When they're done with that field, are they walking to another field? Are they having to walk back to the area where they're taking their break or the lunch? What's happening at the end of the day? You can kind of do a rough estimate. It doesn't have to be tracked minute to minute for non-productive time, but there should be some compensation there if you are doing piecework. Now, if you're paying a minimum hourly rate, then if it's as long as it's minimum wage, then you're covering all of their hours and you don't have to do that. So that's what we've seen a lot of customers doing, is moving to base hourly minimum wage and then a incentive pay or smaller piecework pay on top of that to still try and incentivize productivity. But what we've seen is some customers are calling that a bonus and then not paying breaks. And that again does not comply with our California AB 1513 rest and recovery laws. If there's any kind of productivity pay, any type of piece rate that's based on you're doing X, so we're going to pay you Y, even if it's on top of hourly wages, you need to pay rest breaks. So those are some things that you can look at what you did last year, look at, coming up this season, what are your pay rates going to be? What are your policies? And make sure that you are accurately compensating for all of these issues. So again, some of that's outside the program, but what we've found is customers that aren't using data collections have really started to look at their timesheets and modify their timesheets so that the supervisors do have the ability to track this information. The other thing that we're seeing with timesheets is that a lot of customers are asking signatures. And so they're having every employee sign off that timesheet at the end of the day. You may also have a data collection system, but you may also have a physical sign off sheet that just has times and breaks and has wording on there. I've acknowledged I've received all my breaks, I've received my meal periods, and the employee is signing a physical sheet. So what we have, if you're not familiar, we do have the ability to pre-print crew sheets. Now, some customers say, well, we don't pre-assign employees to crews, so we can't use that, but you can still use a blank template. So what we've done is I've added onto our help, or our media team, Chris and Mark, have added some of the templates that we've done for other customers so that you can download them and customize them and see if they, are help you track what's going on with your time a little bit better. So we'll again be sending out this document to you, but you can go to our help and go to our crew sheets. And down below on the crew sheets using Excel template, there's a few different templates that you can download. And then these will open in Excel. And so then you can modify it. You can add your own headers. You can add your own logos, customize it as much as you need. So here's just kind of an example of, being able to do multiple start and stop times, different fields at the top, your break times, lunch times. And then this one was just an hourly, so we have hours and a signature the employee can sign. And again, you can work with your attorney if you want to make some attestation down at the bottom, saying I acknowledge I've received my breaks, meal periods, and so on. So once you've modified your Excel sheet, the way the print crew sheets works in the program is you go on your payroll menu to crews, or you can go from your employee list to crew sheets. So you do have to have a crew saved, at least at a minimum, have an ID. So if you don't have any employees pre-assigned, that's okay. You just create an ID. You don't have to add employees. If you do have employees that regularly stay on the crew, then you can go to the add button and the account number, type in an account number, and then hit the space bar to select an employee to add them to the crew. There's also a setting in the program setup on the payroll tab that allows the program to automatically change crew numbers, this auto update crew numbers. What happens is when you finish payroll each week, the last crew that the employee worked on, he will get changed and put on that crew automatically. Some people love that because that's where they're typically going to stay for the next week, but some people, they're moving around so much they don't want the program to do that. So you can consider whether or not that is beneficial to you and turn that on if it's applicable. So back on the just printing crew sheets, down here, the crew sheet type, some of these are predefined crew sheets that all look a little bit different. And there's some samples in the help document on these. Um, but what happened is we had so many customers saying, well, can you add this? Can you do this? We weren't going to create a list with 100 different custom crew sheets. So we just decided to implement the Excel. So that's why we have the Excel that you can modify yourself. So when you set this crew sheet type to Excel, then when you go to print the crew sheets, it will ask you for the Excel template. So you can actually do different templates for different types of work. You may have a template for when you're in harvest versus other types of the year. Or you can have a individual, oops, didn't mean to email, wrong button. You can have an individual crew sheet if you have some like irrigators that are moving around, they keep their own time card versus the crews. So again, when we set that, select that template, then what it's going to do is it's going to drop in the employee account numbers and names and any other fields that you have included in that Excel sheet. So going back to the help, you can see if you wanted to include other things in the sheet. Where did it go? Field names. Sorry, I just didn't see the drop down here. So this field names for Crew Excel template, these are other things that you can drop into your Excel sheet. So if you want to print the employee name, first, last name, or last, first, you can copy these fields from the help file into your Excel sheet. And then that's where the program will apply the information. So if you wanted things like their cell phone or the last four of the social or badge number, all of these things are customizable. We're not going to go through kind of like every little scenario, but for our moderators, were there any general questions that have come in yet just on crews or crew sheets or uncollected time?
No questions yet.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now I am so excited to announce a new feature. This is something that I have been asking for a long time, is an automated way of doing non-productive time. Now, we do have in our daily payroll, there are several different ways of paying a crew. So we have an entry where you can just do one line and then you can say pay crew and it'll copy to everybody else that's already pre-assigned to that crew. Or if you didn't have a pre-assigned crew, you can enter one line and go to enter account numbers and type in the account numbers from your timesheet. And that's actually the second quickest way of paying employees if you have their account numbers on the timesheet and it's non-productive time, everybody's getting 0.17. We put one line in, we put all the rest of the account numbers in to copy that line. But that's still having to go through the process one time for piecework, one time for non-productive time. The quickest way of entering piecework payroll in our system is actually the Crew Sheet Wizard. So if you've never used this before, you can test it out. But this is where, because non-productive time, we're trying to figure out If we want to do it like rest and recovery, have it subtract from the piecework, or if it just adds it and pays everybody that's on the screen the non-productive time. There's so many different ways of doing it. So what we decided is the simplest and the fastest method of entering piecework payroll with non-productive time is the crew sheet wizard. So some of you, since you haven't, may have not used this before, I am going to go through it, kind of explain it a little bit. But we're also working on some updated help documentation. This new feature was just added last week. So we're still finalizing the help and documentation, but we'll include all of this in a blog post later this week. So again, what the crew sheet wizard does is it takes us through putting in a timesheet with piecework and non-productive time. We can only do one day at a time because there's so many fields that it creates. But if you're doing hourly, you can also use this as a weekly timesheet entry. So we go ahead and just select our crew to start, our crop or cost center where the employee was working, what job we're doing, and then depending on if you're a labor contractor or a farm operation, your entries here will look a little bit different. I have both enabled, so I have my grower, and then for ones that are doing cost accounting, you would have your crop year. So if you're not doing cost accounting, you won't see this on your screen. I also have multi-state enabled, so I have a state entry. If you don't have multi-state, you won't see that. So if it doesn't look exactly like your screen, don't worry. It just depends on what modules you have enabled. Now, the cruise sheet number, this is an identifier to a specific cruise sheet. So if you aren't familiar with this, one of the tools that we have with those pre-printed cruise sheets is it can print a cruise sheet number. And the program remembers who was on that cruise sheet when it printed. So when you go through this wizard, it brings those employees up. If you're not using that, you can still use the cruise sheet number to assign a unique timesheet number for these entries. This is actually stored on the line items. So if you're looking at like the edit finalized check view, you can see the timesheet number that an entry came from. Then you can go back to your paperwork and find that timesheet. That's really what it was designed to do. These cruise sheet numbers kind of started, back in 80s, 90s when people had tablets and bought tablets of cruise sheets. They would have a sheet number on each one of them, almost like a check number. So that's why we call it a cruise sheet, or in some windows, it's called a timesheet number, but it's the same thing. All right, so we say what we're doing, where they're working. We're going to go ahead and do one day. And we're going to say we're doing piecework, but you can also use this for base hourly and incentive pay. So when you do base hourly, you're doing a base hourly rate and an incentive rate at the same time. But for purposes of this morning, we're just going to do piecework. Some of these fields apply to hourly timesheets, like use pay rates from employee file. That wouldn't be necessary for piecework. And then if you're doing like tonnage where your piecework goes out to 4 decimal places, you can mark the display pieces to 4 decimals. And the other 2 settings here apply to supervisor. So you can either exclude the supervisor or use a different pay rate, like if they're getting a salary. So now we do our hours. So I can go ahead and put in my hours that I'm doing for piecework. Then I can do up to 2 non-productive times. So the first non-productive time, we can select, I missed one setup. Okay, I'll go back to the setup in just a moment. Got ahead of myself just a little bit. The program allows for up to 2 non-productive times during this wizard. And so there's a place where we're going to set these up. I'll come back to that in just a minute. So you may have just general miscellaneous non-productive time, like I said, like moving between the fields, walking back and forth from breaks and lunches. But you may also have things like exercise or safety or like traveling. So maybe they're driving from one grower to another. You could put that in as hourly, but you can also do it here as non-productive time. And then we have the pay rate that we're doing for non-productive time. So that's minimum wage or higher. So if you're doing a higher base hourly rate, you can put that in. Now you can also do your breaks here. So if you want to do your breaks through the normal process of applying the breaks once all the days are in, that is okay. But this way allows you to see the breaks on the grid that we'll get to in just a moment, and uh, edit, like especially here in the valley where we have heat illness, where they might have individual employees need an extra break. It gives you a way to easily edit that while we're doing our pieces. If you have pre-printed crew sheets, then we can select what order they were printed. But as I mentioned, if you don't have pre-printed crew sheets, you can still use this wizard. And what you do is you use this custom option. And what's good about this custom option is actually while you are entering the employees, you can put the pieces right on the grid. So we have their account number and their pieces as I just go through my timesheet. I don't remember all of my account numbers, so I'm going to use my lookup. So you still have your lookup where you can do your normal searches by first name, last name, and so on. So we'll just do a few employees here. We have our pieces, and now on our total review, we can see our hours. So again, if somebody left early, we can edit that one person. Our non-productive times, our break times. So if somebody needed an extra heat on this break, we can edit their time, and then review our pieces and our totals at the bottom. So then when we finish, now we have all 4 lines created: our piecework, our 2 non-productives, and our rest and recovery. And I know I was explaining that as I was going along, but if you do that and you do it a routine, you can imagine that can be a very fast entry process for you, especially as you do it over and over again and it's repetitive. So I mentioned I missed, I jumped ahead of myself here a little bit. The setup for those non-productive times, how that selection comes up in the wizard is done through the define rest and recovery time on the breaks menu. And I know it says define rest and recovery time on the menu. We have limited space there to put a description. That's the way we named it, but we have used this in the past for non-productive time. So we already had the fields here, so we just used this same window to also define the non-productive time. This is something a grid we created when we were doing the AB 1513 restitution payments, so we could separate out non-productive and break pay. So what you want to do is you want to put in your wage type that is used for non-productive time and then the job. And you can do as many combinations as you might need. And that is what created that list, that drop-down list while I was going through the crew sheet entry wizard. So there is a question about the base hourly. I'll go ahead and do one more just since there was a request to see it. So on the base hourly, we're doing the exact same process. So we have here our hourly rate and our piece rate. And so we can do the same thing with our time, do the same thing with our non-productive time. And we can do the same thing with our pieces and our hours. And so we still have the review our hours, non-productive behind pieces, breaks that we can review and we can edit. You can see our piece rate here as well as our hourly rate. And then when we finish our lines, now we have 5 lines for every employee: base hourly, incentive pay, our non-productive, 2 lines, and our rest and recovery. So there was a question on the missed meal periods. So for missed meal periods, that is also set up in the rest and recovery, non-productive time definitions. You do need a wage type for the missed meal periods, but you set it up on the whatever wage type you use with the missed meal break selection. And so you'll enter that line. You do have to enter that line manually. But when you do your batch report, it will automatically update the rate to the same regular rate of pay as our breaks. If you are doing weekly, you can use the Cruise Sheet Wizard. I'll just show you briefly what it looks like weekly, but it doesn't work weekly with the breaks and the non-productive time. Like I mentioned, there's just so many lines there on the grid to edit. Normally when you're doing a weekly, that edit screen is going to have each day here. So it will look, let me go just do a predefined list here. Your weekly will look like this, so you can go through and edit each day. If you're doing piecework and with the non-productive time and breaks and stuff, it's just too much to have on the screen. So you do just have to go through each day if you are doing piecework. Now, I do want to mention that timesheet number, you can reuse it. So if you have a weekly sheet that is piecework, you can go ahead and reuse a timesheet number that you've already used. And then what it will do, actually I want to go back, I'll use 204 again. I've already used 204. What that will do is it will pre-populate the employees. So when I go to my custom, it will copy the employees that I had previously entered in on that last timesheet number. So that's what you would do is if you want to use this wizard, but you're doing a weekly sheet and it's piecework, you would just end up going through this wizard for each of the 5 days or 6 days, use the same timesheet number, and then you're able to just come in and edit your pieces. You don't necessarily have to have 2 non-productive times. It's whatever it is applicable to you. So if you just have 1, you're just gonna select the 1, not enter any time on the non-productive time entry. You can just do 1. The missed meal period is a penalty of 1 hour per missed meal, but also if you missed a break, then you also have to pay the penalty for that. So it just depends on what they missed or how much they missed. Our moderators, are there any other questions that I missed as you're looking through there?
There was one more from Laura Cervantes. Do you have to pay non-productive time when an employee is walking to their vehicle from their break?
That you might need to consult with legal counsel on the technicalities of that. There are certain rules about like how close the break area has to be, like the shade and water. And so from my understanding, it would be to like that point. But if they're going to their car, I can't say on that. Sorry, it's a little bit more legal than what I am aware of.
That was the only other question.
All right, thank you. So we hope you can play with that. I hope, like I said, you can go through that wizard, and you can always then just delete the daily payroll lines. You can just play with it when you're not in your payroll workflow processes and see how it works out for you. And that is, like I did mention, that was released last week. I do think I will confirm in our blog post. I think it was posted in a check for updates. All right, so we'll go on to our second. That actually took a lot more time than I thought, but we'll push through here, see how we can do on time. I won't spend a lot of time on employee miscategorization just because there is so much legal interpretation and little nuances to this, but I will talk about a few of the issues that we see. So in general, to be exempt, being paid a salary and exempt from minimum wage and overtime, there's a duties test, there's a minimum salary, and that salary needs to be paid in the definition and meet the terms of what salary is defined as. So the biggest area where we see there might be miscategorization in exempt is with supervisors. So we hear like supervisors, crew bosses, foremen. You want to have it very clear, like what your positions are and what their duties and responsibilities are. And then when you're determining, okay, we're paying these a salary, do they meet the duties test? So really, the duties test is, are they management? So are they managing the crews? Are they assigning work? Are they handling discipline? Are they involved in hiring or firing decisions? And this must be met, the time that they're doing management must be at least 50% of their hours worked each week. So just thinking about an employee, like we're talking about like self audits. Say if Joe Ayala got upset with us, was disgruntled. We were paying him a salary. We didn't pay him any overtime last year. Could he go to a lawyer and say, because of his duties and what the work he performed, he wasn't exempt from overtime and you owe him, how many hours of overtime? So think through what can happen, because that's really what, you don't want to think that of employees, but that's kind of what's happening now is, you may think, oh, he's family, but that's, you have to be cautious. So really make sure you're able to really substantiate um, categorizing as exempt. Now, we know in California, minimum wage, up and up and up. So our now minimum salary is 70,000. So we have now kind of a threshold where a lot of customers are changing people from salary. They're not meeting that wage. I do have to say, this is just the salary for exemption. So we still do have employees on salary that might be lower than this, but then you need to pay overtime. So that's where you have to be careful of, yeah, we're going to call them salary, but they're non-exempt salary. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. The next issue with miscategorization is daily rates. And I just love this story. Not love, but it's kind of crazy to me. This went to the Supreme Court. It was an oil rigger who worked 12 to 14 hours a day. He was paid daily. So he got over $900 a day. His salaries were over 200,000. You think, man, yeah, he's exempt. He's earning over $200,000. But because he was paid daily and the definition of salary is guaranteed weekly amount, they found that the employer did owe him overtime. So can you imagine what that kind of amounted to? Plus the lawyer's fees for taking this to the Supreme Court. So if you are doing daily rates and you are not doing overtime, that's something that you really need to address. So that's kind of what we're seeing. The issues we're seeing with overtime, customers are still maybe doing rates by job and just putting in overtime based on the job rate. Anytime there's multiple rates, we need to use regular rate of pay. The day rate issue, non-exempt salary, and then the issue of bonuses. So that's what we'll kind of go through a little bit. Again, some of this, I'm going to assume understand some of the basics of overtime. And if you don't, you can schedule a training session with our training department. So the multiple pay rates is a federal rule, and it's always been a federal rule. And if you look on the state of California, the DIR, on their frequently asked questions for overtime, it also states if there are more than 2 rates, you need to pay based on the weighted average. So this wasn't really anything new. It's just as overtime was implemented on ag, it's become an issue in our industry. So this is just kind of a little basic, simple comparison. On the left is what we would commonly see customers do. They had 2 different rates in the day. They worked 4 hours at 18. they worked 5 hours at 17, but they would split it 4 hours to meet our 8-hour limit in a day. They do 1 overtime at 17 times 1.5, so our 25.50 for that hour, and then our total pay for that day is 165.50. So what's the correct way? The correct way is you're paying all the hours at the straight time. So we're paying our 4 hours at 18, we're paying our 5 hours at 17. So those total wages, $157, is our straight time. We divide that by the 9 hours of work. I didn't do that part of the math here. But when we take that amount, divide it by 5, we get to our overtime premium, our extra half time that we owe them, because we're paying them that straight time in the 5 hours, paid them the 17, we owe them the extra half time. So now what the correct total we pay him for the day is 165.72. We say, well, that's only 22 cents. But 22 cents for one day, and this is just based on these rates. Of course, it's going to vary over a whole week, over 100 employees. You can see how those class action lawsuits come up and how you have a penalty because you didn't pay them the correct rate. And then you get a penalty because their wage statement wasn't correct. So that's how, they compound. Now, I point out, customers say, well, if we paid that overtime hour, time and a half at 18, I would have paid him more. And that's exactly correct. You could, if you're paying at the higher rate, you would be paying them more. Using the overtime premium just makes it the same calculation method no matter what, and it's fair. There's no advantage to the employee or to the employer because you're using an average. So if you are using data collections and they're sending us overtime rates and they're doing it based on the job and the time and a half rates, I would go and talk to them about just sending Datatech all the straight time and using our overtime premium. Or if you're using our system and you're using the apply hourly overtime and you're doing it in a way that you're applying the overtime to hourly and there's different rates and you're doing them at different rates, then again, I would not use the hourly overtime method, use the overtime premium method. I will make a note here too. Mike from Rosasco Law Group is the one that I did a presentation with at the APMA. And in his presentation, I really like the way it's presented is that overtime, it's not a rate, it's not a pay rate, it's a penalty. The whole reason we pay overtime is to discourage employees from working over those 8 hours. So when you shift your mindset that this is almost like a missed meal premium, this is overtime premium, this is a penalty we owe them for having worked overtime, it kind of shifts the gears on how these are supposed to be calculated. So the next issue that I mentioned was day rates. So if you are doing day rates, they should be tracked separately, differently from salary. So if you haven't already done this, we recommend creating a different wage code for your daily rates. And however you want to name it, like I said, we had a lot of customers that would use our old salary code. And so then that didn't allow you to enter in any hours. So we set up our daily rate, we set it as piecework. And you can, like I mentioned, you can still pay them that daily rate, but then you are responsible for paying overtime. So here's our one employee with our daily rate. I use this employee in my career sheet wizard, so I'm just going to delete these lines real quick. So when we do our batch report to do all of our calculations, this is going to work like any other overtime on piecework. It is going to take our, let me just put his number in. It is going to take the $250 in wages, divide by 9, get our regular rate of pay, and then add the extra half for however many overtime hours the employee worked. So this is going to be similar to salary, but slightly different. So on our salary, I did the same thing here. I used this employee on the wizard, so I'm going to delete these lines. The salary, when they're non-exempt, only covers the wages up to 40 hours. So if they worked 45, we're not taking the salary divided by 45 because that salary shouldn't include any overtime because they're non-exempt. We are taking the salary divided by 40. So if you've seen it, we added this setting last year to the employee file, the salary overtime exempt. So any employees that you are paying a salary that's not exempt, you want to make sure that this is not checkmarked. So then with the same calculations on our batch report, only it's taking the salary divided by 40 hours. So in this case, I entered in their hours, 9 hours each day for this supervisor. We have his salary set up in his employee profile. So it's automatically going to pull from that. It also can be manually entered. When we run the batch report, it's going to subtract, similar to the way the hourly overtime rules worked, subtract the amount of overtime hours and then apply them with an OT code at time and a half. Now, again, I'm kind of going through this quickly, but if you need to review this, feel free to call our support department and review these settings. One thing to keep in mind is how the data is entered. So with salary hours, we've actually for a long time with our Oregon and Washington customers had hours entered on salary because they have certain deductions based on the hours. Oregon has workers benefit fund that's an hourly rate, and LNI in Washington is based on hourly rates. So we have ways, if you're importing data from data collections, to put into your import configuration that there's going to be a salary offset. So it'll read in the hours, but if there's any wages associated to that, it'll zero them out so it uses the profile. You can also, a lot of our customers manually do all their salary checks in the check entry. So that's completely fine. Just be aware, if you have any salary that are not exempt, you should record the hours. This also came up this year with pay data reporting. Pay data reporting in the instructions actually say for salary, you need to use hours worked for reporting purposes. And so there's several questions that came up regarding that. Since a lot of our customers weren't doing hours on salary checks, we did modify the pay data reporting to apply 40 hours to each week worked. But I think really the best practice going forward is to record hours on salary. And so what we've done is we've actually modified the entry. So now you can do a salary line and put in piecework hours. That's fairly new too. All right, I know that was a lot. I don't know how many specific questions we can take on that, but is there anything general, Markin, that we want to cover during the session?
There's a question from Barbarito asking for an explanation of how overtime premiums paid in piecework.
How overtime premium is on piecework? Oh, it's paid in piecework. Okay, so just general, we have quite extensive help on this. So I said, like, assuming a lot of you have already done overtime premium, but in general, just the basic calculation is wages for work performed. So that doesn't include holiday or sick pay or vacation, but it's hours for work divided by those work hours. So again, if we had $1,200 in wages and you worked 40 hours, your regular rate of pay is $30. If you had some daily overtime, because you've already paid all the pieces, we have to owe the employee the extra half time as a penalty. So it takes that regular rate of pay, the $30, and divides it in half, 15. That's what they get for every hour of overtime worked. Okay. So that was just a print screen. So again, I am I'm considering doing a whole webinar just on overtime, because we have a lot of customers now doing extra bonuses or incentive, different ways of doing incentive pay. And again, we don't have time in our session today, but here's the basics of bonuses. Bonuses are included in your regular rate of pay calculations. And if you are doing bonuses for any production period, say at the end of the season, if you have perfect attendance or you've done so many pounds, so many tons, we're going to pay you this amount. That's based on, if it's based on production, something you've earned over the season. So then they owe you overtime on that bonus for any overtime in that season. So it doesn't matter, it's weekly or seasonal bonus, you still have to make an overtime premium compensation for that. What gets really confusing and really difficult is it's a different method, whether it's flat rate or production. So if you do an attendance bonus, we're going to pay you $50 for showing up on Saturday. Because that $50 isn't necessarily based on the quantity of production, then those pieces don't really count towards the bonus. So it actually does a time and a half calculation. So we figure out again the rate of regular pay, we add an overtime premium bonus on the bonus for 1.5 times the regular rate of pay. Production is similar to piecework, where it counts the pieces you already earned, have kind of been earned towards the bonus. And then we use the half regular rate of pay method. So we have a link, we'll have a link in materials, but we also have this detailed in our help. So there's a whole process, goes through the whole explanation that I'm simplifying here. But it goes through the wage type setups. You have to set up different wage types because we have a definition on the wage types for whether or not it is flat sum or production. So the program knows how to do either method. And then let me go back to the help. There are a couple different links here as to whether you're doing it for a single pay period or an earnings period. So what happens with an earnings period, where it's over a period of time, the bonuses do have to be done on a separate check, but you can put in the entire pay period from the very first pay period of that production bonus period. And then the program will find all of the overtime during that period to calculate and add an overtime premium for the bonus. So I'm saying this is very complicated and there's a lot to it, but if you do the setup in the program will do it for you. So there's a question, just going back a little bit, about doing piecework and other days hourly. If there's any piecework in the week, the breaks on all of the days have to be paid out at the regular rate of pay. This is a big issue that we see with labor contractors, where growers that they're working hourly for will get upset because there's higher breaks at higher pay rates on the days they're working hourly. But for you to be in compliance with the laws, you have to do that. Otherwise, employees, again, they can come back and say, hey, I got breaks on these days, but the breaks on these days should have been also paid at the higher rate, and do a suit. I think we have to move on because of time. So any of the other questions that we didn't get to, like I mentioned, we will cover in our blog post. One more last little point on overtime is we do have an overtime audit report. So if you haven't looked at this might be a good thing to do for your self-audit, to look back at your payroll for last year, last season, and see if you had any mistakes or any issues with the calculations that were done. So this is on your payroll reports menu, and then overtime audit report. I'm just going to do a brief period just for time purposes, but you can put in any date range, and you can do certain crews or certain employees, or you can run them all. By default, this is only going to print checks with issues. But if you want to see all checks with overtime, you can select that option. So this report shows what was paid. So this section on the left is paid. So I paid all my time at regular hours. I missed applying my overtime rules. This should have had an hour of overtime on the first. So on the second, it's showing here what should we have paid. And then it calculates what's our regular rate of pay. And then again, that we owe them the extra half time because we paid it as regular. We owe them the extra half time. So this is what we owe the employee. And I'll be honest, when a couple of years ago, when we really got into the issues of day rates, I ran these reports with some of our customers that weren't doing overtime, but they were putting in hours. So they were recording the hours correctly, but they weren't applying overtime rules. Some of their employees, they owed thousands of dollars to. So, it does add up over time. Alrighty, so we'll move on from overtime. Again, if there's any time at the end, I may go back to some of the questions, but just to make sure we get through the rest of the material, we'll move on. Our fourth area of compliance was actually brought up to me again in the presentation I did at the APMA with Mike from Rosasco Law Group. He used this example of what not to do when making corrections and retro pay. And when he first prepared, he said, I hope this isn't from your program. And let's immediately recognize that it is. But I'm like, that's okay, because this is a good example of where even having the right tools, if you don't use them right, you can cause yourself a lot of problems. So there's like one starting issue that creates 3 more issues. So for some of you, are very good at auditing, can you see what some of our problems are here on this check? I'll give you a second. All right, so let's move on to what are some of our problems. So we can see these 2 lines that say adjust HRR and 21.5 at 75, 234 at 50. So all of us that do payroll knows what this is, right? This is probably for some period of time, a couple months, we were paying the wrong rate for the job the employee was doing. So they're modifying their time, paying them an extra 75 cents for 21.5 hours and an extra 50 cents for 234 hours. Like we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to pay the employee, right? But they coded this, they put it in on a day. They put it on the 6th, okay? But they also put it in using a code that's set to hours. So that's our first problem. The wage code wasn't set up correctly. So then what happens? Well, now our hours for this check look like 270. Okay, well, if there wasn't any breaks or anything overtime on here, that would be okay. But they did apply breaks, even though this is hourly pay. So they pulled out breaks, but with that 270 hours, now the break rates are wrong. And overtime premium is wrong. Then, because this wage type was set up as hours, it pulled a unit out of our correction that we were trying to handle for the retro pay. So you can see that, one problem can result. And when lawyers are looking at this, because his biggest thing is he's looking at it from an audit standpoint. I don't just running this through an analysis in Excel, I don't know what this is. You can look at it and we can interpret it, but on a, auditing side, they don't want to see, issues like this. So when you have corrections, you really want to be careful about how they are entered. And depending on the types of corrections, you may need multiple wage types. So let's say the example where we are correcting a rate of pay. Then we can have a wage code for a rate adjustment. Or you can even say just wage correction, but you need to be aware of what the base pay type is. So the base pay type is what tells the program if it's hourly or not. Anything that's not hourly, we just use piecework as a general catch-all. Some of the other things like illness and paid leave and vacation, those are, happening where they're deducting sick pay time and vacation time. So the base pay type is used internally in the program for a lot of different things. But if you have a wage code set to hourly, the program treats that as hours worked. That can also throw off your, insurance reports, like your pay data reporting. Some of the environmental fees where you need to see, how many employees worked over 500 hours. So having these set incorrectly can throw off, other reporting. So again, if we're just correcting rates, it's not hours worked. We want to have that set to piecework. And we don't want it to be included in the current week's regular rate of pay calculations. So this little button here should be unchecked. So if we missed hours, like our retro pay is because we missed hours completely, then of course we want to have it set to regular hours. We want it to count as hours worked. The best practice is for adjustments and retro pay to be done on a separate check. That's it's just cleaner. And you can also then put the pay period that you're adjusting, like that 230 hours. We know that had to be over several weeks. Well, you can put, from January 1st to February 5th, this is the period we're correcting. So that's our number one recommendation. But we realize a lot of customers don't want to cut separate checks. So if you want to make a prior week's wage correction on an existing check, the next best practice would be do your week, finish your daily payroll, create your checks, then add the adjustment into the check entry. Because then what you can do is you can add a line without putting a specific work date on it. And then you already done all your overtime, rest and recovery. If you've missed that setting on the wage type setup of include and regular rate of pay calculations, you're still doing it after those calculations were done. So that's our one best practice. Do it a separate check. Two, if you're going to do it on the same check, add it after you do your daily payroll. And of course, make sure that your wage type is set up. So in here now we can see these are appearing under units, not under hours. So you can do with wage corrections, there's a question like, can you do negative and positive? Um, yeah, you can do that. It just depends on what the situation is. Um, so if you paid them, 230 hours at 18 and it should have been 1850, you can go and do 230 hours, negative 230 hours at 18, then add 230 hours um, with 18. Um, that would be fine. You still just want to be clear, and I'll just pull it up so you can see what I'm talking about. So we have regular hours. We can do negative 230 at 18. And then I could do another line here, regular hours positive 1850. So then we are paying them the difference of the hours. I would still set the pay period here for the period of time that was getting adjusted. So if, again, something went to an audit or a lawsuit, the lawyers are running this, looking at this data, in Excel or just through an exported, they know they can see a pay period, they can see what that adjustment is for. Are there any other general questions, Mark, that you think we should address during the session, or is most of the rest of them ones we'll address on the blog?
There was one from Barbarito. She was using the safe harbor report to make sure that rest and recovery is being paid correctly, but is there a different report or way of ensuring rest and recovery is being paid?
You know what? I've had that question, so that is something I was going to talk to Matt about. Like the overtime audit, still having that as an available report. It is still, I don't have it on my menu because I've created these files after, I think that's been 10 years now. So I don't have it on my menu, but if you have any new companies where it's not on your menu, we can go ahead and enable it. But yeah, I will talk to Matt and see if that could be developed into a regular audit report. I will just answer this now because it's kind of general and easy to answer. If your employees are only working hourly, and even if there's two different rates, those still encompass your break time. So you don't have to pull out breaks just on hourly payroll. Only when any kind of piecework is introduced, because basically what they want the employees to know is that you're paid for that break what you would earn anyway. So when you're doing hourly time, they're paid what they would have earned if they didn't take their break. We do have some customers that do want to do breaks on hourly. So when you do your add update breaks, you can select extract break time from employees that only have hourly. But it's not a requirement. We just have customers that do it just so the employees always see breaks on their check. Okay, I will go ahead and continue to our last topic, and then we should still have a few minutes to go back to some questions. So the last thing we want to talk about, and again, I hope most people, we've had sick pay for so long. I hope everybody's doing this and doing it correctly, but we still see from our support department ones that are not getting sick pay assigned or not, paying it out using the correct rate. So the first thing that I'll mention is the sick pay changed in California in 2024. And we occasionally see in our support department where customers never updated their sick pay plans. So before, well, I mean, usually you would do this at the start of the year, but I know a lot of people are getting into their harvest season, their heavy hiring season. So it is a good time to go ahead and review your sick pay plan. So 2024, again, this is California, other states. I know we have ones from other states in our session, will vary, but just double check your rules for your state. Um, the maximum annual accrual is 10 days. So 80 hours for most employees. If you have part time, you can set up additional rules, assign alternate settings to part time. Now, the allowed is 40. And so, there's always some confusion there. So it's basically so you can keep earning and you can take your time, but you continue earning so that next year when it rolls over, you have that time available. Basically, trying to get you to an equivalent of a lump sum where every year you get reset. It's just with accrual, if you use the 40, you would start, at zero if you weren't allowed to keep accruing. So make sure you have your accrual set to 80 if you are doing accrual, and 40 hours is allowed. If you're doing lump sum, then you will do your just allowed of 40. Okay. Now, the other big, well, I was going to say that the one thing that we see too is that when you hire new employees, they're not getting assigned a sick pay plan. So if you don't have a default automatically getting put onto the employees, that setting is on your tools menu under program setup. And then under payroll and benefits is your default sick pay plan. If you have multi-state, you have different plans, there's not one default, then at least select the require sick pay plan. Because then it will remind you if you forget to put it on the employee that one has to be assigned to save the employee file. So I think that's one of the biggest things is just not getting the sick pay on the employees to begin with. The other thing that we see is not applying the correct rate. So I guess this varies by state, but most states you either can use the week's average hourly rate, which is the regular rate of pay for the week. So if I'm out sick Monday, but I work Tuesday to Friday, it's going to use the average of those days. What I typically would have gotten had I worked. But you also have the ability to use look back. And so some of our customers, especially in piecework, where they might have a really high week, they want to use average of what's been done through the prior period. So in California, that is 90 days. In other states, I think Washington is 30. So depending on what your state rules are, you can select the look back. We do have customers say use higher or lower thereof. I don't really like that. I think you should for um, auditing and, future issues, possible wage and hour issues, I would select one, and that's our policy. And that policy should, be in writing and supplied to the employees. So this little button here, this tells the program to calculate that rate. And this is what I mentioned. I see a lot of customers that have unchecked this and are just always paying sick pay at minimum wage. That can definitely get you in trouble. So what happens with sick pay? Let me go ahead and put an entry in here. I don't think I had one. I don't think I've used. Actually, let me use a different employee account because I don't know if I've done payroll for this one. This is the one that we had some other pay. So on our sick pay, when you run the report for all employees, you will see a, well, this probably isn't going to work right with this salary. Let me do a different employee. Pedro. There we go. Let's do Pedro. On the report, you will see a parentheses, and then if it's using regular rate of pay, you will see this with an R, and that's telling you it's using the current week's regular rate of pay. If you have your plan set to look back, then that will have a P. So you can see using the look back period, now he's getting less than his average for this week. And when you do the report just for the one employee with sick pay, so maybe you're running your whole batch report and you have some sick pay in there, and you're just like, how is this getting calculated? If you put just that one employee's account number in there, it'll ask you if you want to print that sick pay report. And so then what that report does is it shows you all of the lines that it's using and what all the rates were to get to the total wages divided by hours to get to that rate. So if there's a question about that, you can put in that individual employee account number to get that report. But if you're not having the program calculate that, I'd definitely look at your rules and set that. Or we have some customers that are using like data collections and they're putting the sick pay in there, and some are using that rate. But again, it depends on what you've done on the payroll side as to whether that rate from data collections is accurate. There's a question on sick pay for salary employees. That's kind of why mine was messed up there. But what you would typically do is you would reduce their salary by the amount of sick pay. So if let me re-enter the salary here. So if I typically have a salary of $1,200, let's say his hourly rate is 30, so we're going to be taking 8 hours at 30. So then what I can do is just deduct from the salary the not negative, but just reduce the salary by the amount of sick pay that I'm adding. And that's the same that you would do like if you did vacation or holiday. On the sick pay, the other thing that you have is a gap of employment. So the two things that apply there are the discard so many days after termination. This again varies by state. In California, it's a full year. So if you have employees that they work 6 months, they're gone for 6 months, but they come back, that's still within the year. So their settings, what they've accrued, their year may roll over when they come back, so it carries over. But if you're doing an accrual, then that does carry over. With labor contractors who may have shorter work periods and gaps in employment, that's what the sick pay work gap does. Is let's say the employee comes, they're doing some pruning in December and they only worked a month. That was like their starting anniversary date for their sick pay was December. So the program says, okay, January, February, March, it's available. So maybe they only worked a month and they came back in March. What this does is this tells the program if they had a gap of more than 30 days, we're going to reevaluate whether or not they worked 90 days. So when they come back in March, the program's going to say, oh, they had a gap here, and we see that they only worked a month in December. So they need to work March and April to meet 90 days. And so now we're going to set the available date to May. So that's the other tool that you can use if you have gaps in work. But if it's like an H-2A contract and they're returning within a year of their last date, then you do have to leave the accrual that they've earned so far. Mark, were there some other general questions in there that you thought would be good to go over
Yeah, there's
during?
a question from Leo Corona regarding H-2A employees who are here from year to year. He says, when there's a break of employment and they're hired again, is that their new anniversary date for sick pay purposes, or should their original date of hire be used for that and qualification purposes?
Yeah, so that kind of follows the same thing that I was just saying about their accrual balance. Is the same thing applies. The settings stay if they return within a year. So if they started in May and they worked May to October, um, they come back the next May. If it was like they came back in April, they would still be within that year, and then the rollover will happen on their anniversary. But if they were gone for a full year, then they can start over and start a new anniversary period. And some of that you can also, like I said, I'm just from my knowledge and my um, research of that. That's what I know to the best of my ability. You can always um, review that with your legal counsel to make sure that's applicable. But from our understanding, that the year is also controlling that anniversary date.
There's another question from Abigail. Should salary be set up to piecework to document hours worked?
Yeah, so you can now, with the latest update, you can now do salary with piecework hours without having to change the wage type. So in the past, like I mentioned with other states, Washington and Oregon, we had customers that changed this type to piecework. But we just made a program change so that this actually it's not open here. It's open in daily payroll. If you do it through if you do your salary through check entry, then yes, go ahead and leave this as piecework hours. Um, but daily payroll, he changed it. So I'll actually I'll discuss that with Matt just to make sure. Um, Let me do another entry here. Actually, I'll just change this one to salary. Yeah, so he changed it on daily payroll, but he didn't change it in check entry. So we'll verify that. We'll put that up on the blog when we post this, a clarification on that. But we are recommending, especially kind of some of the issues with pay data reporting, that you do record hours worked on salary now. That is our recommendation.
There was another question from Joel Lopez. Why is restaurant recovery amounts sometimes, why do they sometimes don't match the daily batch report and create checks? He says, sometimes I run payroll batch report and after I create checks, I see that the restaurant recovery amounts change.
We would probably have to see a specific report to be able to answer that. Um, it is, really dependent on your selections and, um, if anything was edited. But if it's just immediate, you run this report and then you say create checks, there shouldn't be anything different. So you might, if you have something that you can duplicate, or if you can, save your report as a PDF, and then if you run it again and it's different, then you can send us the two reports. We have cases where sometimes people are putting in a crew and employees have moved around, and so certain wages aren't on the report. And then when they create checks, they take the crew out, and so then now the wages are different. So it can be any number of, scenarios, but if the criteria, the selections are exactly the same, it should not change. I know there's a few other ones that are specific that you can address with our support department, a few others that we may just cover in our frequently asked questions. You see.
There was another one on paying sick time for salary employees.
Yeah, I went over, I think I did that one. Yeah, that was where you just reduce the salary by the amount of the sick pay that you're going to be adding. Should have deleted these words here. So there was a question about um, retro pay time that comes in um, from like 2 weeks prior. We don't have anything right now that um, automatically recalculates the regular rate of pay for that prior week with the missing earnings. This was something actually I missed actually mentioning this when we were talking about retro pay. I should have gotten this in the slide, and we talked about this a little bit at the APMA. Is that when you do have corrections for a prior period, if that affects the rest and recovery and the overtime premium as well for that prior period, you need to make sure you correct those. So Neri, right now, it just depends on how much uh, information you had on that check. What I would probably recommend is, like, if it's, a supervisor and it's one employee, I would probably re-enter everything from that prior week's check plus the missing wages to run the daily payroll batch report with the calculations to see everything that should have been paid differently. You might even go, as so far as what was mentioned earlier from another customer about like doing a negative and a positive entry, then, doing a check and probably through check entry, putting everything in that was paid with a negative and then what should have been paid. Or like I said, if you put everything in from that check into daily payroll, get the um, uh, daily payroll batch report to see what should have been paid, any guaranteed wage adjustments, any differences in rest and recovery, any differences in overtime premium, then you to know the total wage correction that you need to pay. But yeah, that does get into a really sticky situation when you're not getting all of that time turned in time, and you have a lot of those calculations to go back and recalculate. I'll think about that. Maybe I will do a blog on that, or do some additional information in our help on addressing that situation.
Hannah,
All
is
right.
this gonna end in is the recording gonna end right now? The timer's going down.
No, I think it's okay. But I think
Okay.
I think we've done all the questions that we can take for our session. I really thank you all for attending. We hope to do this more often. So, what we're going to be doing, I know there's survey fatigue. Everybody's tired of surveys, but to really help us like figure out what customers want, what information, what presentations you're interested in, please. I didn't have it ready to send this afternoon, but probably tomorrow we'll send out a survey to the attendees to get your feedback on the session, and then what topics you would like to see us address in the future, and also just topics that you might want in help or blog posts. Mark and Carissa, I want to thank them for all of their efforts helping me put this presentation together. They did all the editing and all the PowerPoint and made it pretty. So thanks to Mark and Carissa. Thank you for all attending. We hope to get your feedback and do this again soon. Bye-bye.